Hey there, vintage car enthusiasts. We're taking a deep dive today
A deep dive tailored for you listeners of Vintage Car Chronicles.
on Spotify, Deezer, Apple Music, and YouTube.
We're buckling up and exploring the legacy of Brabham,
Brabham in motorsport.
a team that's way more than just a name slapped on a car.
More than just a name.
Yeah, they were innovators, champions,
Champion.
and a real driving force in Formula One and beyond.
That's right. Not only did they clinch multiple championships,
But they pioneered technology that's still in use today.
it's a story filled with underdog victories.
Daring innovation.
And yes, even some controversy.
It really reminds us that motorsport is about so much more than speed,
It's about pushing the boundaries,
of what's possible.
both on and off the track.
Exactly.
So where do we even begin with a legacy as massive as Brabham's?
Well, let's rewind to the very beginning.
Back to the origin story.
It all starts with two Aussies.
Two Aussies
Jack Brabham, the driver with a need for speed,
and
and Ron Tauranac, the design genius.
the design genius behind those legendary cars.
Their partnership actually predates their Formula One fame.
Really?
Back in the 1950s, they were already making waves
Making waves.
in the Australian racing scene,
Wow.
building and racing cars together.
So Jack already had the driving talent,
He did indeed.
but what propelled him onto the global stage?
Well, he joined Cooper
Hmm.
and went on to win 2 Formula One World Championships with them.
Two.
It was a remarkable achievement.
It really was.
But it exposed a key difference in philosophy
I'm sure-
between Jack and the Cooper team.
You mean his desire to innovate?
Exactly.
I read that he got increasingly frustrated.
With Cooper's resistance to trying new things,
He wanted to push the envelope experiment.
find that extra edge,
And that's how Motor Racing Developments was born.
or MRD.
MRD in 1960.
It's funny how such a legendary name almost ended up being something completely different
Didn't they have a near miss with the name MRD?
because of its unfortunate French pronunciation.
Yeah, the Merde incident.
A journalist pointed out that MRD sounded a bit too close to a rather unpleasant French word.
It's a good thing they decided to stick with Brabham.
Much less awkward, to say the least.
Definitely a wise choice.
So with a new name and a burning ambition,
Brabham sets out to conquer Formula One.
but their early years weren't exactly bursting with trophies.
They weren't
Initially, they focused on building customer cars.
customer
It's
cars.
essentially selling their well-engineered chassis to privateer teams and drivers.
Looking for a competitive edge.
It was a smart strategy
Yeah, it allowed them to gradually establish themselves in the F1 paddock.
and gain valuable experience.
So they were learning the ropes
building a reputation.
for reliability and performance.
Exactly.
And then 1964, they scored their first Formula One victory.
They did.
What changed? Did they find that magic formula?
Well, 1966 was the real game changer.
1960s.
The FIA decided to shake things up.
Shake things up how?
By doubling the allowed engine capacity,
Wow.
it threw the entire field into a scramble.
A scrabble for...
For powerful engines.
So many teams went with big names.
Tried and true manufacturers.
But Brabham,
They went a different route.
they partnered with Repco,
An Australian company
an Australian company.
that had never built a Formula One engine before.
This sounds like the ultimate underdog story.
It was a bold, almost reckless gamble.
What were they thinking?
Well, it was driven by necessity and opportunity.
Necessity and opportunity.
Big-name manufacturers were understandably reluctant to supply a potential rival.
It makes sense.
Repco, on the other hand,
Yeah.
saw it as a chance to make a name for themselves.
In Brabham.
They needed a reliable, lightweight engine that would fit their innovative chassis design.
It's almost like they were destined to defy the odds.
That combination of a Brabham chassis and the unproven Repco engine,
It was a stroke of genius.
light, nimble, reliable, those cars were shockingly fast.
They absolutely dominated
Jack Brabham himself clinched the championship that year,
that year.
making history as the first and still the only driver to win the Formula One World Championship in a car bearing his own name.
Talk about a legacy moment.
It's the stuff of legends.
And their success didn't end there.
No, it didn't.
Denny Hulme
Driving for Brabham.
took home the championship the following year.
That's right.
But even with back-to-back
Which
championships,
weren't immune to the typical growing pains of a Formula One team.
of course, success in Formula One is a fickle beast.
You're constantly battling against fierce competition
Technological challenges.
and the ever-changing landscape of the sport.
And for Brabham, the next chapter brings a major shakeup
A change in ownership.
that would steer the team in a whole new direction.
1970,
1970.
enter Bernie Ecclestone.
A figure who would go on to become synonymous with Formula One.
He takes the reins from Jack Brabham,
And Ron Tauranac.
eventually departs.
This marks the beginning of what we might call
The Ecclestone era of Brabham,
Now, Ecclestone was a shrewd businessman.
known for his deal-making and his vision for the sport.
But how did his arrival impact the team's innovative spirit?
There were certainly some growing pains,
As you can imagine.
but Ecclestone made some strategic moves.
That would prove crucial for the team's future.
One of the most significant was
Right.
bringing in Gordon Murray.
As their new design guru,
Gordon Murray.
the mastermind behind some of the most iconic Formula One cars,
He had a knack for thinking outside the box.
for finding unconventional solutions.
That pushed the boundaries of race car design.
So they had this brilliant designer, a new owner with a bold vision.
And a team with a hunger to win.
What happens next?
Well, let's just say their pursuit of that competitive edge leads them down some very interesting and sometimes controversial paths.
We'll save that for the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, Vintage Car Chronicles fans, because things are about to get really interesting.
Really interesting.
All right, Vintage Car Chronicles listeners, we left off with Brabham,
Entering a new era,
with Bernie Ecclestone at the helm.
and Gordon Murray bringing his design genius to the team. It's the 1970s, and Formula One is evolving rapidly.
How does Brabham adapt to stay ahead of the pack?
That's the question.
One thing that becomes clear is that Brabham, under Ecclestone and Murray, isn't afraid to take risks.
They weren't afraid to take risks.
They're constantly searching for that next advantage.
Through engine partnerships, aerodynamic innovations.
Or even pushing the boundaries of the rulebook
We touched on their partnership with Alfa Romeo,
for their powerful engines.
but I imagine that came with its own set of challenges.
Alfa Romeo wasn't exactly known for its bulletproof reliability.
At the time,
It was a gamble for sure.
a gamble.
Alfa's engines packed a punch, but they could be temperamental.
Temperamental.
It's a classic example of Brabham's high-risk, high-reward approach.
They weren't content with settling.
They wanted the power that could potentially propel them to the front of the grid.
And it wasn't just about raw engine power.
No.
Brabham was also pioneering new technologies,
That would revolutionize the sport.
like their introduction of carbon brakes in 1976.
That was a game changer.
Carbon brakes are standard in motorsport today.
But back then, it was a radical concept.
Brabham saw the potential for lighter, more efficient braking.
And they weren't afraid to be the first to try it in Formula One.
But it wasn't an instant success, was it?
Sure, there were some initial reliability issues.
With those early carbon brakes,
Unfortunately, yes.
didn't they even contribute to a serious accident?
Carlos Pace, a talented Brazilian driver for Brabham,
Yes.
lost his life in a plane crash in 1977.
Oh, that's right.
While the cause of the crash was never definitively determined,
Right.
there were concerns that the intense heat generated by the carbon brakes might have played a role.
A tragic reminder of the risks inherent in pushing the boundaries of technology.
That's right.
A somber reminder that motorsport, for all its thrills, can be a dangerous endeavor.
Absolutely.
But even in the face of setbacks, Brabham never lost that drive to innovate.
They didn't.
And perhaps the most striking example of their audacious spirit is the infamous fan car of 1978.
The BT-46B.
Can you explain to our listeners how that thing actually worked?
It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
It does.
It was the brainchild of Gordon Murray.
Of course.
It featured a massive fan mounted at the rear of the car,
A massive fan.
but it wasn't there to cool the engine.
It wasn't.
The fan was ingeniously connected to the engine
Okay.
and essentially acted as a giant vacuum cleaner.
A giant vacuum cleaner.
Giant vacuum cleaner.
Sucking the car down onto the track.
So it created an incredible amount of downforce.
Allowing the car to corner at speeds that were simply impossible for its rivals.
So it was like sticking a vacuum cleaner to the bottom of a race car.
Exactly.
No wonder it was so dominant.
Niki Lauda won its only race.
Its only race,
By a huge margin.
making it clear that this was a technology that could potentially dominate the sport.
Right.
But why was it banned after just one race?
Seems like a bit of an overreaction.
It does.
Well, it all boils down to the regulations.
The regulations.
The fan car was incredibly effective, no doubt about it.
Incredibly effective. But the controversy arose because the rules stated that aerodynamic devices couldn't have any moving parts,
So even though the fan was technically connected to the engine,
which was allowed to move.
the fact that the fan itself was spinning was deemed a violation.
That's right.
Talk about a loophole.
Brabham was always pushing the boundaries of what was technically legal,
They were masters.
of exploiting the gray areas of the rulebook.
And to be fair, they weren't the only ones.
Formula One has always been a game of innovation within the constraints of regulations.
Bitch.
But the fan car was such a radical concept that it forced the FIA to clarify the rules and ultimately ban the technology.
It's almost like the fan car was too good.
Too innovative for its own good.
But even without the fan car, Brabham continued to come up with clever solutions.
And technological advancements.
Like hydropneumatic suspension in 1981.
As a way to circumvent ride height regulations.
It allowed them to run the car lower to the ground.
For better aerodynamics.
But then raise it up at the push of a button.
During scrutineering. It's clever.
And then they were instrumental in bringing back in-race refueling in 1982.
Pit stops were a bit less exciting back then.
Refueling was a strategic gamble.
That added a whole new layer of complexity.
So races.
And Brabham was one of the teams that really capitalized on this new element.
Absolutely.
So they're pushing the boundaries with technology.
Exploiting loopholes in the regulations.
And generally shaking things up in Formula One.
But it's not all smooth sailing for Brabham during this period.
They also faced some controversies.
There were accusations of cheating.
Cheating.
Claims that their cars were underweight.
Underweight.
Whispers of illegal modifications.
Was there any truth to these accusations?
It's hard to say for sure.
Were they bending the rules a bit too far?
Formula One has always been a fiercely competitive environment.
That's for sure.
And rival teams are always looking for any advantage, real or perceived.
Right.
Some of the accusations might have been unfounded.
Unfounded.
Simply a result of other teams trying to discredit their success.
But there were definitely instances where Brabham pushed the limits of legality.
It's a fine line between innovation and breaking the rules.
And it seems like Brabham often walked that line with a sense of daring, even a touch of mischief.
But did this ultimately contribute to their downfall?
It's difficult to say definitively.
The late 1980s were a turbulent period for Brabham.
BMW, their engine supplier, pulled out.
Gordon Murray departed.
And it seemed like Ecclestone's interest in the team was waning.
They struggled to find the same level of success.
And ultimately withdrew from Formula One in 1988.
A sad end for a team that had achieved so much.
And left such a mark on the sport.
But before we delve into their lasting legacy, let's not forget about Brabham's ventures beyond the world of Formula One.
They weren't just an F1 team.
They weren't.
Brabham's ambition and passion for motorsport extended far beyond the confines of Formula One.
They achieved remarkable success in other racing categories.
Proving that their expertise and innovative spirit could translate across different disciplines.
So tell us, where else did the Brabham name make its mark?
What other racing adventures did they embark on?
I'm curious.
Well, for starters, they made a significant impact in IndyCar racing.
IndyCar racing.
Particularly in the legendary Indianapolis 500.
The Indy 500.
They also dominated Formula 2.
Formula 2.
Proving they could build winning cars for up-and-coming drivers.
And let's not forget their role as a customer car manufacturer.
They supplied competitive chassis to countless teams and drivers.
Helping to shape the landscape of motorsport beyond their own team's success.
That's a testament to their engineering prowess and their commitment to the sport as a whole.
They weren't just interested in winning for themselves.
They wanted to elevate the entire racing community.
So even though they eventually bowed out of Formula One, their impact on motorsport continued.
It seems like the Brabham name was synonymous with excellence, innovation, and a never-give-up attitude.
Precisely. And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore how that legacy lives on today and what lessons we can learn from the remarkable story of Brabham.
The remarkable story of Brabham.
All right, Vintage Car Chronicles listeners, we've journeyed through Brabham's incredible rise.
Their daring innovations.
And even their controversial moments.
But what about their lasting impact?
What about it?
We've hinted at their legacy, but let's really unpack what made Brabham such a force.
Even decades after their Formula One exit.
It's fascinating how their influence transcends mere wins and trophies.
It really is.
It's about a mindset.
A mindset.
A relentless pursuit of improvement.
And a willingness to challenge the status quo.
That still resonates in motorsport today.
You mentioned Jack Brabham's mentorship before.
Beyond being a champion driver himself,
Yeah.
he seemed to have this knack for nurturing talent in others.
It wasn't just about driving fast.
Exactly.
Like Denny Hulme.
And Jochen Rindt.
Both future world champions.
Who honed their skills under Brabham's guidance.
It speaks to a culture of passing on knowledge, pushing each other to be better.
Both on and off the track.
And let's not forget the engineers.
From Ron Tauranac's meticulous designs
to Gordon Murray's out-of-the-box thinking,
Brabham attracted some of the brightest minds in motorsport.
Murray's impact especially is undeniable.
His innovations during the Brabham years,
and later with McLaren,
shaped the way we think about race car design.
He wasn't afraid to experiment even if it meant an occasional setback.
And it brings us back to those groundbreaking technologies they pioneered.
We talked about carbon brakes becoming the standard.
But for our listeners who might not understand the full impact,
Yeah.
can you elaborate on why that was such a big deal?
I think some people take it for granted.
It wasn't just about weight saving,
Right.
though that was a factor.
It was a factor.
Brabham realized that consistent braking
Lap
performance
after lap.
was key to tire management.
Oh,
This was something other teams were overlooking.
so they were ahead of their time,
Carbon brakes resisted fade,
allowing drivers to brake later and harder.
which in turn opened up new strategic possibilities during races.
It was a whole chain reaction of benefits that they were the first to really exploit.
Exactly.
And then there was the fan car,
Audacious, controversial,
and ultimately banned.
but a brilliant demonstration of their lateral thinking.
Do you think that kind of daring is missing in modern Formula One?
It's a complex issue.
It is,
Regulations are much tighter now,
which can stifle some of that radical innovation.
but the spirit of pushing boundaries still exists.
So it's still there.
Teams are constantly searching for those tiny margins of advantage
Through complex aerodynamic designs,
or sophisticated engine mapping,
the methods may have changed.
but the fundamental drive to innovate is still there.
It makes you wonder, what if Brabham were still around today?
Given their history of shaking things up,
What kind of impact would they have on the current Formula One landscape?
it's a tantalizing thought.
Imagine.
A team with that same fearless approach, that same commitment to finding unconventional solutions,
They'd be a force to be reckoned with,
pushing the boundaries of technology.
and challenging the established order.
It's a shame we'll never know for sure.
But their legacy lives on,
Not just in the history books.
but in the inspiration they provide.
To anyone who dares to dream big and push the limits of what's possible.
And who knows?
Maybe someday we'll see the Brabham name back on the grid.
Carrying that torch of innovation into a new era of motorsport.
That would be something to see.
It would.
But for now, we'll have to content ourselves with the incredible story they left behind.
A big thanks to all you Vintage Car Chronicles listeners for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Brabham.
Remember, there's a new episode of Vintage Car Chronicles every single day.
So keep those engines revving.